Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, Sam Darnold is a candidate for most valuable player. It's weird to say, but feel it in your heart. It's just true. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the decisions that are kind of looking forward as far as what the offseason is going to bring us. And my hot take about what one singular position could do more for this Vikings defense than any other. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Flores. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Fornes, and as always, in the top left corner, he's producer Dave. Sam Darnold MVP. Dave, how does that feel?
Could be from bust to MVP. That would be something.
It's quite an interesting conundrum, and having the conversation about Sam Darnold being the most valuable player has had some of my friends in the industry yelling at me that I'm an idiot and I am going to hell because I continue to write about this topic. But here's the reality of it. Whether you believe it or not, the sports books are buying it. And when the sports books buy it, there's real buzz. Like sometimes you get like a groundswell in the world of politics, like where you don't expect a result on election day, but all of a sudden everybody comes out of the woodwork and votes for a candidate. And you're like, whoa, we did not expect that to happen, because they weren't talking about it. It was more of, hey, we believe this, but it's more of, we're just going to not talk about it. We're going to kind of keep it to ourselves. And I think that's where a lot of the Sam Darnold discussion has been for a couple of weeks. When I talked about it initially 2 weeks ago, comparing his case with Jared Goff's, and quite frankly, I still think Goff is a bad MVP candidate because of what the offense is and how I view most valuable player. And it's a value proposition. If you take Sam,
a tweet today comparing those two, Darnold and Goff. Darnold throws more deep balls, and Goff is a yak merchant.
Oh, Goff is 100% a yak merchant. But you know what? That's not insulting. They're winning football games, and they're whipping ass doing it. So it's not a bad strategy. It's not to say that Goff isn't good or any of that. What the whole point of this is, Dave, is to kind of discern who's elevating their team and who's simply running it. Goff is great at running the offense that is given to him. Goff is great at doing what he's asked to do. But if things go off script, or if he has to put the team on his shoulders, it's a completely different scenario. He is not an MVP. Lamar Jackson, MVP. Josh Allen, MVP. Saquon Barkley, MVP. Patrick Mahomes, I'd argue a lot of their success so far this year has been Andy Reid more than the brilliance of Patrick Mahomes. But I can see more of an argument. Sam Darnold is the reason why this Minnesota Vikings offense is humming. We can talk about the scheme. We can talk about the players. And look, let's just be real. They're a good factor of why this team is performing as well as it is. There's no doubt about it. Here's the discerning factor. When things go awry, Darnold is creating and making plays. That 52-yard bomb to Justin Jefferson for a touchdown, Darnold escapes the pressure. Darnold finds a lane. Darnold escapes the pocket. Darnold finds Jefferson open down the field. Throws the ball perfectly. That's what we're looking at here. We're looking at who is elevating their team. And quite frankly, Sam Darnold is doing a tremendous job, Dave, of elevating his team. It's really, really impressive what he's been able to do. And I want to continue seeing it. I think he deserves more recognition than he is getting. But it's just frustrating because his name is Sam Darnold. He's not getting that kind of love. If his name was anything else, if his name was CJ Stroud, he'd be at the top of the list. And that's where some of the interesting elements of MVP come into play. Something that we don't necessarily talk about. MVP is heavy in the narrative. It's a heavy narrative award. What does that mean? Well, if you have cachet and you have like a narrative going into the year that you're going to be really good, you are going to shoot up to the top. It takes a lot for you to, hey, I'm going to take over that spot. It just does. You have preconceived notions. You have beliefs about players. You have beliefs about teams. And it takes a while for you to either accept or deny that it's reality or not. And sometimes it takes people longer than others to get rid of their preconceived notions, because as humans, human nature is we want to be right and we want to try and prove that we're right. But it takes the better ones, the better analysts in this case, to be able to see, hey, you know what? I just got this wrong. And here's why I got this wrong. And here's how we can learn from it and be better moving forward. That's kind of where I'm at with Sam Darnold and his MVP candidacy. I don't think he's the best MVP candidate, but he's certainly a really good one. I would call him a top 4 MVP candidate right now. And he's currently 6th in the MVP rankings on DraftKings Sportsbook at plus 5,000. 2 weeks ago, he was plus 9,000. And I believe he was like 14th. Like, this is kind of where we're at. The narrative behind Darnold to going into the year and how that's evolved or whatever to where we're at now, he just doesn't have that cachet. Now, think of Lamar Jackson in 2019, Patrick Mahomes in 2018. Their first full years as starters, they won MVP because they burst onto the scene and they took over. Now it helps that they were first-round draft picks, of course. But if Darnold wants to be MVP, what he's going to need to do is take things to a different level over the next 4 games. He's going to have to continue this heater that he's on. 11 touchdowns, 1 fumble lost in the last 4 games. You have to continue that in some way, shape, or form. You have to make the voters realize, hey, I need to pay attention to Sam Darnold's MVP candidacy. I need to really consider voting for this guy because he's on such a heater. He has to overcome more than these other candidates because he has these preconceived notions about him. And is that fair? Fair is not a word that we can really use to talk about this. It's just reality.
It's first impressions. When you meet somebody and you get a first impression, whether you like them immediately or dislike them immediately, or whether they're worth a darn or not worth a darn, his first impression was horrible to the league, i.e. with the Jets, because the Jets were the Jets and they're dysfunctional and all that. And it was not good. It's taken years to beat a bad first impression. And that goes for anybody that you meet. If they give you a bad first impression, it takes a while for you to get over that. Well, maybe the league's in the process of getting over that.
Yeah. And it's going to take time. It took time with Geno Smith. There are still people who don't think Geno Smith's very good. Geno Smith rules, man. He's so good. And he was kind of in a similar spot to Sam Darnold, but he had a longer path to take to get that starting opportunity with the Seattle Seahawks. I remember when they traded Russell Wilson, they're like, hey, we're going to ride with Geno Smith or Drew Lock. And we kind of laughed at them. They're getting the last laugh now because Geno Smith is arguably the best quarterback under pressure this year. And we're going to face Geno Smith, not this week, but next week. That's going to be a fascinating football game, Dave. 3:05 Central Time. I'm going to be honest, I can't wait. That's going to be a fun football game to watch. But kind of because of that, you can kind of look at some parallels where people didn't want to believe. They wanted their narratives, their preconceived notions to be proven true. They didn't want somebody to go and disprove everything that they believed, which, let's just be real, that's just a normal part of human nature. That's a normal part of football. That's a normal part of discourse. Like, let's just be real. I hated Bo Nix coming out of the draft. He's played relatively well this year. Deserves a lot of credit for that. But that one in itself is also a rare one where you don't want to fully judge somebody until they get about 3 years in the league. We all remember Mac Jones. He made a Pro Bowl as a rookie, and then... So you have to be patient, too, while you're starting to form these narratives. And that entire construct that I just mentioned is a decent reason why we see people that have trepidations about Sam Darnold. So it's also justified to a point. You want to make sure that what you're seeing is not a fluke. What you're seeing is not a mirage. Case Keenum in 2017, complete mirage. The Vikings in 2022 were not a complete mirage, but they were somewhat of a mirage because they were not quite as strong as the standard 13-14. But what were they? An incredibly well-coached team who probably was a 10-win team. That was probably a 10-win football team. And then, Chris, we can talk about Bo Nix all day, but here's the thing about Bo Nix. What he did in college is not translatable. There's a difference between being good in college and good in the pros. Bo Nix was good in college because everything was manufactured for him. But enough about Bo Nix. I don't like talking about that guy. It's just the whole conundrum itself is really interesting because you have to find a way to balance your preconceived notions and believing that they're disproving them, but also realize that this could be a complete mirage and it could be a one-year wonder. Remember, the 80s and 90s were filled with musicians who were one-hit wonders. Well, is Darnold a one-hit wonder? And that's kind of where some of these analysts are at. And you know what? I believed I had my trepidations for the first 4 weeks. I'm just like, okay, he's playing well. This is great. But how sustainable is this? This is Sam Darnold we're talking about. Well, it's sustainable, Dave. He's playing incredibly well so far this year. He's sustaining it with a lot of people. And he's doing it in ways that are incredibly sustainable. I think that's tremendous. And I think that's something that we can believe in. I think it's something that we can trust that he's going to be able to continue doing this, and why we've had conversations. Well, what do the Vikings do? Do they bring him back? Do they re-sign him? We talked Monday about, hey, could it be the franchise tag? There's a reason why we're having these conversations now, because Darnold has put that into our heads. Darnold has put it into the ecosphere. It's not people just talking. It's the play. The play is what's doing it. And that's why I think we need to do a little bit more with the play when we're having some of these conversations about Darnold. I think that they're in a better spot than some people want to admit, because it's the Vikings, because it's easy to shit on them. It's easy to ignore them. Oh, it's just the Vikings. You're going to choke like they always do. I mean, the Cubs choked for 108 years and they won a title. All it takes is 1 year.
Hopefully we don't have to wait 108 years. I'll be long dead and buried by then.
Oh, good Lord. If it takes 108 years, Dave, I'll be in my 80s by the time this team wins a title. Oh, that'd be gross. That'd be so gross.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting kind of talking about this, Dave, because if you want to watch the games, which, let's just be real, most national analysts do not have the time to watch every single game every single week. Or if they do, at a certain point, they are just not critically watching enough. And I'm not saying it to be disrespectful. I'm saying it's just reality. It is incredibly hard to continue watching or to critically watch all these games and stay focused. Not only are you theoretically critically watching 5 games a week, okay? You have your 3 primetime games, your noon and your 3 o'clock games, okay? Then, in between there, you have to figure out a way to watch upward of 11 more games critically. That's a lot. That is a hell of a lot to ask anybody. I got 3 TVs in the basement. I can't watch everything critically, even when I have them on. You miss stuff. You have to be careful. And it makes it really tough with some of these national analysts and extra frustrating because these analysts aren't me. I cover this team full time. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm smarter than these national analysts, but I could argue that I'm more educated because of how in-depth I get with this team, how I cover them day in and day out. I'll listen and cover the press conferences, watch the game film critically of every game. And that's where I think we as Vikings fans can be a little frustrated with national media because we don't get that same kind of attention. It's almost like we feel that the national media should be the same coverage as what we give locally. But that's just not the case. We just want to feel like it's fair. We want to feel like you're just not using a preconceived narrative that you believe that this is what this team is going to be and grow it, evolve it. That's all we ask. We just want to feel like you are actually paying attention to this team and not just spewing stuff because, well, your job is to cover all 32 and you have to, for lack of a better term, spew stuff.
Hey, they do. They got to get engagement just like everybody else. That's how they get paid.
Yeah. All right. Enough of me on my soapbox again, because I like to get on that soapbox. I really do. Let's talk about Sam Darnold's MVP case. So we'll start with the odds, okay? Betting odds are really important here because they do a really good job of forecasting. Now, they're never perfect, but they do a good job of forecasting kind of how things are being viewed across the board. Josh Allen is the clubhouse leader at minus 400. So the way betting odds work, for those of you who don't know, minus 400 means you have to bet $400 to make $100. If it's plus 400, you bet 100 and you make $400 in profit off of that. So that's kind of how the plus and minuses work. Running back Saquon Barkley is plus 450. So you would win 450 on a $100 bet. Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff are plus 1,000. Patrick Mahomes is plus 4,000. Sam Darnold, 6th place by himself, plus 5,000. Honestly, Dave, that's 6th is fine. I'd put him at 4th of this grouping, and I can't really think of anybody else except for maybe Joe Burrow, but that team is just losing so many football games that it's hard to put Burrow in that conversation, but he's the only reason they're in these games. So it's kind of an intriguing element.
Mm-hmm.
And let's kind of talk about some of the elements that I think are really good with Sam Darnold's case. Let's look at basic stats. So I call them counting stats. That's what a lot of people consider them. Your basic stats everybody talks about: completion percentage, passing yards, touchdowns, all that stuff. Okay. 7th in completion percentage in the NFL at 68.4%. 6th in passing yards, 3,299. Tied 3rd with 28 touchdown passes. This one's the one that's probably his worst stat. Tied 6th most interceptions with 10. But of the above list I mentioned, Mahomes has 11. 4th in yards per attempt at 8.5 yards. 3rd in quarterback rating at 108.1. Game-winning drives, he's got 4 of them, tied for 2nd. That one is kind of a fluky stat. Sometimes it's good to be high in game-winning drives, but sometimes it's bad. The context behind the game-winning drives matters more than the actual game-winning drives itself, because why were you in that position to begin with? You have to ask yourself that question first. Why was it taking you so long to be able to kind of get that game-winning drive? Why were you in that position? Why couldn't you have won the game before? And that's where some of the things where you talk about, okay, I'd rather have the game won. That's fine. But sometimes it's the NFL, and it's hard to win football games. It's okay to have a game-winning drive once in a while. It's okay to kind of have some of those conversations. It's okay to have to win it at the end because it's the National Football League. It is. It's hard. I mean, the Eagles nearly lost to the Panthers last week, and the Panthers are going to pick top 5. It's hard to win in the NFL. Now, let's continue on this conversation. Let's look at some underlying metrics. And we're going to use those in neutral situations. So what does that mean, neutral situations? It means we're going to use it when the win probability is between 10 and 90%. Try to eliminate garbage time. Okay? EPA per play, 0.241 points per play, 5th in the National Football League among quarterbacks. Success rate, meaning is it a successful play? And we've talked about what success rate is before. 52.9%, 4th in the NFL. CPOE, completion percentage over expected. What percent of your passes are being completed that probably shouldn't have been? 1st in the NFL, 8.4%. He's not throwing up jump balls. He's fitting into tight windows. He's making bonkers throws. He's earning that number because that number can be fluky. And I think that's an important factor to note. Air yards per attempt, 9.1, 5th in the National Football League. What does that mean? How many yards past the line of scrimmage does your pass travel? And 9.1 yards, Dave? That's pretty good. I'll take that. And when you look at some of those, excuse me, like Darnold's doing a pretty good job. He's doing a pretty good job in those elements. Note, all of those were in the top 5. That's an important factor here. And as we kind of continue on, we're going to talk about his performance when you're throwing the ball 20 plus yards down the field. This is where things get real spicy. This is the number one factor for why I believe Sam Darnold is a really good MVP candidate. How he attacks down the field. 20 plus yard throws. We've seen it. We know exactly what's happening. We know that Sam Darnold loves to throw the ball down the field. We know that Kevin O'Connell. My brain was getting him and Kwesi kind of confused for a second. We know that Kevin O'Connell likes to attack down the field. All of that stuff matters. But being successful in doing so is really important. He has the 8th most throws that travel 20 plus yards down the field. 51 of them so far this year. He also has the 7th highest adjusted big time throw rate at 29.7%. The second most big time throws with 19. And he also has the second highest completion percentage at 52.9 and adjusted completion percentage at 54.9. He leads the NFL in the following categories when we're talking about 20 plus yard throws down the field. Completions, he has 27 of them. Yards, 969. 19.0 yards per attempt and 7 touchdowns. They're not just attacking down the field. They're doing it consistently. They're doing it efficiently. They're doing it effectively, and it's translating to winning football games. That is an MVP. It takes a lot to make those throws. You have to be able to stand in the pocket. Sam Darnold is 3rd in the National Football League with time to throw at 3.11 seconds. He's doing a great job of hanging in the pocket. He's doing a great job of evading pressure. He's doing a great job of making things happen. And Dave, I can't say enough good things about what Sam Darnold has been able to do this year. And Some of it is Kevin O'Connell, some of it's the team, but he is the one generating these explosives. There was one play, it was right after he got sacked, it became a 3rd and 16. Maybe it was a 3rd and 13, but it was a 3rd and long. They're at their own 18, 17-yard line. Sam Darnold feels pressure right in front of him, slides back to his left, fires a 20-yard dig route to Justin Jefferson, hits it for a first down. Kirk Cousins would have thrown the outlet to Cam Akers and gotten 8 yards at most and would have been like, all right, we're punting. This is where Sam Darnold has elevated things. He's elevated people. And I'm really appreciative of kind of the job he's done there. And to kind of summarize it, he's also doing a great job under pressure, which doesn't necessarily feel that way all the time, Dave, but it's true. So let's take a look at just what he's done under pressure. Pro Football Focus has him facing pressure on 169 dropbacks. 37.5% of his dropbacks. That number's a little high. You'd like it to be a little lower. Some of the pressure
all quarterbacks get pressured, but how's it compared?
Around 32, 33% is about league average. Pressure is just the nature of throwing the football. Especially with this offense and how Darnold holds on to the football, because Kevin O'Connell has these long developing or out concepts that attack down the field vertically consistently. You have to be able to deal with pressure. And he's shockingly really good at it. And this is pressure as a whole. This is not separating out blitz versus not blitz, which is a completely different scenario. Something we talked about last week when we were facing Kirk Cousins. Cousins is really good against the blitz. He's really bad when just facing general pressure, because general pressure usually means you have 7 or 8 drop back into coverage. And it's hard to find receivers in that sense. But here's how he is against pressure. 3rd in completion percentage, 56.6%. 3rd in yards, 982. 1st in yards per attempt under pressure, 8.7. 1st in touchdowns with 12. Tied 2nd with 12 big-time throws. He's doing everything that you ask. He's doing everything that you want. I love it. I think that he needs and deserves way more respect. And Gary kind of mentioned the comments that this team has elevated Sam. I'm not sure if you're saying that I'm arguing it or I have argued it. I think it's a combination. I don't think you can make the argument that Sam has elevated this team and not argue that the team has elevated Sam. I think to a point, every quarterback gets elevated by their football team, unless it's just an absolute dumpster fire. But I think there's enough elevation from Sam Darnold to where you can have a real conversation about him being the guy, being a bona fide MVP candidate. He just is. He's great. Now, the one area that we talked about already that's going to hinder his candidacy is that narrative element. He's got preconceived notions that he has to overcome. That's going to take a lot to get there. The other element, he is not really a runner. You know who are runners? Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Having that element makes a really big difference when it comes to evolution, evolving your team, elevating the players around you, being able to create outside of structure. Now, Darnold isn't immobile. It's not like he can't run, but they use the quarterback run game as a weapon in Buffalo and Baltimore. You don't do that in Minnesota with this guy. So that is going to be something that's going to be against him because they have that. Is that fair? Who gives a shit about fair? We're not talking about fairness. We're talking about reality here. Darnold is a real MVP candidate. Should he win? If he balls out the next 4 games, I might be able to say yes. Right now, I'm not going to say yes, but he's a real candidate. The Heisman Trophy finalist just got announced earlier this week. Guess what? If you get announced as a Heisman Trophy finalist, you deserve to go to New York. That rules. That's great. Just because you deserve to be a finalist does not mean you deserve the award. Right now, Darnold deserves to be a finalist, but he does not deserve MVP because there are other more deserving candidates. But just the fact that he is a candidate, and it's a real MVP candidate, not fake, not bullshit, real. This rocks. This is great, Dave. It's awesome.
It is. It makes for a wonderful season. One of those magical ones I talked about early that, who knows, maybe. And it looks like it's being that way. So let's roll with it and enjoy it because they don't, as we all know, they don't come around that often.
No, they don't. They do not. But we've talked a lot about the candidacy of Sam Darnold as most valuable player over the course of the last few weeks. And I kind of want to shift the focus because we are going into a really critical offseason. We've talked about whether the Vikings should retain Sam Darnold. We've talked about if it makes sense for them to give him an extension, maybe give him an extension and trade J.J. McCarthy. We've talked about all those angles. But I think what's really going to be interesting, take out quarterback. So let's just say they've decided on their quarterback. Yeah, whether you believe it's JJ, whether you believe it's Sam, I'm going to use that as irrelevant. I want to talk about the defense. I want to talk about the one position that I think the Vikings should prioritize. And that's not to say that I think they should ignore other positions. But I think they should prioritize the linebacker next to Blake Cashman. We're going to find improvements on the defensive line. We're going to find improvements at cornerback. We're going to get younger at the cornerback position. But if you fortify that linebacker next to Blake Cashman and you get a well-rounded player, you get a player who can do a lot for you. You get a player who can be a 3-down guy, who's great at blitzing, great in the run game, can stack and shed blocks, and then drop into coverage and be a menace in zone and handle running backs and tight ends. A well-rounded player at linebacker. Dave, I think that's going to do more from a singular player outside of getting somebody elite like a Jeffery Simmons, because it does what Brian Flores wants to do. Wants to be versatile. Wants to use players in different roles and use deception and simulated pressures. Having another linebacker that can do a multitude of things. Oh, buddy. Talk about a versatility argument. You already have edge rushers in Andrew Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner you can drop into coverage, and they're going to be comfortable. They did it at the college level. Van Ginkel's done it at the pro level. Van Ginkel used to be a middle linebacker. He used to be a guy like Blake Cashman. Now he's more of a hybrid. Dallas Turner, a lot of comps to Dante Hightower. Guess what? That dude, linebacker. You can ask these guys to do different things. And because you can ask them to do different things, guess what? That makes your blitzing more effective. That makes your pressure packages more effective. Because the defense was honestly going to believe that, hey, I could be seeing this guy come at me, or I could be seeing this guy, or I could be seeing all of them. And Delton mentions it in the comments, Jahad Campbell from Alabama. That's exactly the guy that I think could be that elevating factor. And before we kind of talk about, well, why aren't you targeting a cornerback? Why aren't you targeting the defensive tackle? It's not that they're not going to fortify and fix those positions. The thing that Kwesi Ofamensa has done is he has really worked hard to fortify as many positions as he can going into the draft so he can take talent. Taking talent before need is a smart call. Procedurally. Every once in a while, you're going to have, the guy at the position I needed turns out to be great, and the guy who I believe was the best player stunk. Like, there's always going to be variables like that thrown into the equation. It's inevitable because some guys just hit and some guys just don't. And if you end up being able to fortify that defensive line enough and you fortify cornerback enough, guess what, Dave? Now all of a sudden, hey, I don't have to pick either one of these positions. You know what I can do? I can just take the good football player. I can take Jahad Campbell, put him next to Blake Cashman, and elevate this unit. I can now let Ivan Pace Jr. just be this annoying pest, the specialist kind of player that he is. He can do all the things, but he doesn't do all the things well. And I think that is a big factor. You have to be able to do the things well. And quite frankly, Ivan Pace Jr. just does not do a lot of things well enough to really be a guy I want to be a starting inside linebacker for my team. I want him doing certain things. I know I'm going to have to ask him to do the other things as well because you don't want to typecast the player so they see him. And then all of a sudden, hey, I know that this guy's going to be doing one of these things, so I can kind of plan around it. But, man, if you upgraded linebacker, Dave, that could take this defense to an entirely different plane because Brian Flores has already proven that he can mitigate around a defensive line being a little weaker. He can mitigate around your cornerbacks maybe not being quite as talented. And if you got that linebacker, just look at how well Blake Cashman is as a blitzer. Now you have two of those guys. Your fire blitzers are going to be wild. And then your simulated pressures where you can drop those guys into hook zones at the snap. You can do all this kind of stuff. I think this would be a great idea. I think should be a priority. I also think that if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world because Ivan Pace Jr. is still a good player. You can then use that pick to fortify one of those positions even more. Maybe you look on the offensive side of the football with your first pick. It's just fascinating, Dave. I really think linebacker could be a huge turning point for this franchise moving forward.
Could be. Hey, I thought about it, and it sounds feasible, and it's an interesting plan, and it's going to be interesting if they go that way. Now, my question is, how long do you give players to develop? They're so rare that a rookie comes in and makes a difference. Now, long term, yeah, sure. But if we're talking next year, what's the best place to get a rookie? What position? And it depends on how the board falls because there are going to be a handful that make a difference in their first season. That's how I view it. Is a rookie linebacker going to be that much further than Ivan Pace? Ivan Pace will be going into his third year of development. Is he going to make a jump? All sorts of things like that. Like I talk about the lineman. But it applies to every position. Now, some positions need less development. Running back, wide receiver, sort of. Wide receiver, they usually need to learn route, the route trees at the pro level and how to do things. But those are the questions I ask. You want to maximize those early round picks for either they're going to make an impact or immediately, i.e. handful of rookies that do, or they are going to be key pieces longer term. If we draft a center or a guard, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, we need them. But you can't expect them to be all pros their rookie season. You got to wait that couple years to have it develop. Do we want them in the pipeline like I see Juergens been talked about? Yes, we do. We want them in that developmental deal. So hopefully they can take over and be at the level we need them to be. But if that linebacker that you say could be out there that could make, sort of a twin of Cashman skills-wise, oh, heck yeah. I can see how that improves the defense. Big time.
Yeah. Mary December just asked if we should consider trading Dallas Turner considering all the guys we have at edge. No. You don't want Andrew Van Ginkel here long term. He's already 30 years old. The idea is for Van Ginkel to kind of be like a stopgap. Maybe you do keep him, but he plays a less prominent role, and you want Dallas Turner to take over the Van Ginkel role. That's the idea. So, and then I wanted to at least address that, but to kind of go off of what you said, Dave, yeah, you don't draft for this year. You draft for the long term. And by having that linebacker gives you a long-term solution for kind of that idea. Gives you a long-term projection. Now, if you take anybody at the end of the first round, my expectation for them is they play a role on defense, play a few hundred snaps, not too dissimilar to what Dallas Turner is doing. You can't have too high of expectations. I didn't even have that high of expectations for J.J. McCarthy in year one. I would have been fine if he sat the whole year. You just have to be careful with first round picks, because it's an adjustment to the NFL. And sometimes you're not picking them to play right away. You're picking them to be great for you long term. When I pick a guy, I want him to be on my team for 15 years. That's the idea. So if you take the guy, don't expect much year one. You're taking him because you think he's the best player for you long term. And I think that the idea of linebacker is such an interesting and fascinating one.
It is. I agree.
Yeah.
And it's not
Dave,
one thought of often.
No, it's not. But watching the film, I'm like, oh my gosh, all the stuff they have Cashman doing. They could do it with two guys. And they could be more multiple, more diverse. If you can run base looks without having to put in like nickel defenders, you have an advantage. It's the same thing with 12 personnel, where you have an advantage because you can just take advantage of linebackers and coverage. Well, if those guys can cover, you take away their advantage, and now you have the advantage. So I'm really intrigued to kind of see what the Vikings end up doing. We're going to find out in 4 months. But that idea is such a good one. It's such an interesting one. And I want to see it. I want to see more of it. But Dave, that's our show.
Hey, I want to thank everybody that showed up tonight. It's been a great crowd from over the pond with Scottish Bear, and we're not ignoring your post there, Scottish. We're just going to save them for a different time. But we'll have, dedicated something to that. So we'll see. And everybody else that's there, and the debates going to rage, whether it be on Sam Darnold and his MVP status, how much is him, how much is KOC, the scheme, the team, all that, and it all plays together to your hot take on, what if we get a linebacker that's as good or better than Cashman to pair with Cashman? That's an interesting thought. So, like I said, want to thank everybody. And as always, please hit the like button. It's free. Subscribe if you like the show and like good Vikings content where we tell it how we perceive it. We're not sugarcoating anything. If the baby stinks, we're going to tell you the baby stinks. And, of course, ring the bell so make sure you get notified. Because we try to be consistent, but it doesn't always happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. Listen. Like, comment, subscribe. And we'll be back Monday night with the Real Forno Show, previewing the game against the Chicago Bears. We're going to have a Scolders and Spice Thursday night. We're going to have a 2 Old Bloggers on Saturday afternoon. And guess what? Stress-free football on Sunday. Hell yeah, baby. I'll take it. Thank you guys so much for joining. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Jared Goff MVP candidacy. It's a very interesting one, and I think it deserves more of a look than most are willing to give. But I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Fornes and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!